was a wheelchair-bound invalid, and Mom would have me take plates of food over to the old people, and they lived in the lower north portion of that house using a Franklin stove, and that's the only heat they had in the place. And every year the old man would get out on a ladder and paint that house in his BVDs and scandalize the neighborhood. So after the war, Dad took that house and he chopped it up into 4 different apartments, and we lived in the basement. And he collected in advance a rent of 1 year in advance from 4 different desperate families looking for someplace to live, and used their money and remodeled that house, and we lived in the basement. Times got better, we moved upstairs, and then things changed. Not very good observation, I'm sorry to say. After the war, then about 50 years ago, my mother joined an organization called the Independence Women's Study Club, and they took an interest in historic preservation. They sponsored projects, and outside the club, Mom convinced my father to purchase a 2-story structure at the intersection of Truman Road and Pleasant Streets that's just west of the First Baptist Church there, across the street from the Truman home. Okay, that she called it the Jackson House, I believe, and they actually did a very nice job of restoration on that home. In fact, so good that Hallmark Cards hired some models, and a photographer came over and took a photo shoot in that house with a Christmas tree for one of their holiday card things about that time. That's quite a while ago. Since it's deteriorated again. Then about 45 years ago, the Women's Study Club initiative was to preserve the falling down log cabin that was on the back property line of the Independence Animal Hospital property, right there by the railroad track. And I don't know too much about the history of the log cabin. I know about my history in it. And my mother volunteered my father, who volunteered his 2 sons, to do quite a bit of the work. So there's an old man, about 80 years old, and I laid the foundation for that concrete block. It's below grade, you can't see it. And then poured a concrete pad over that whole thing. And my brother was over there cutting up aluminum sheet metal and making tabs and putting numbers in all of them, and numbered every single log, took photographs of it, and then disassembled it. Then quite a few of them had deteriorated, quite a few of the logs had, and then he remade them with an axe and a chainsaw to match the deteriorated ones that he was replacing. Then my father hired, I don't know who financed all this. It could have been my father. I don't know. But at least the Women's Study Club was involved, and then he had someone reassemble the logs, and then I assisted I remember rebuilding the trusses for them, and got the thing together. Someone else came along and built the rock fireplace on the north end of the log cabin, and after a couple of years, the thing fell away somewhat from it. That was torn down, and city crews came in and used a boring machine and drilled down maybe 15 feet and put concrete piers in the bores to stabilize it, because the Independence Power and Light department who was in what is now the Sermon Center. That was a generating power plant for Independence for years. They dumped their coal clinkers in a pit that was right at that location. So it was unstable, and so the fireplace fell away. They drilled down, poured a new pad, put a new fireplace up, fell away, and there's no fireplace on it today for probably the same reason. So the Women's Study Club went on to other things. There's something called the Old Spring Pack that served in Independence for a number of years. They used CDBG funds and did community activation or activities of doing projects. I'm not sure whether that was, why is it named Old Spring Pack, but Catherine Curtis was involved in that, I remember, and maybe used something about that spring and that building with it. So I don't know the history very much of the property. I know the history of my involvement, and that was doing some renovation and putting the thing back together after it had been disassembled. So that's the end of my presentation.
Jim, can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Before the cabin was moved over there, was anything statues, and then there's a bubbling spring when that's turned on. I just wonder, what, if anything, was there before the cabin was moved there?
Well, the city got, I think, a federal grant and helped rebuild that power plant into the Sermon Center. And Cal McDowell was somebody that ramrodded that thing 30, 40 years ago or more. And I don't know the records of it. I can't remember exactly what was there, and I really don't, what was there before. But I know this thing was a fill area because the cinders had been located at that from a former era. So I really don't have any recollection. Okay.
Very much.
We're Don and Joe Reimel. Don's the former mayor of Independence, and I'm his lackey. Independence preservation has a storied past. Our recent history is filled with triumphs and failures. We've received unwelcome notoriety of being placed on the National Register of Endangered Locations because we often have not valued our history and have allowed it to be destroyed. Tourism is the most profitable form of revenue for our community. Visitors come, enjoy, and spend their dollars here, and then they leave. They use very few of our services and contribute to our economy with very little outlay of our tax dollars. Surveys tell us that tourism dollars turn over 5 to 6 times in our community. We also have a bed tax that pays for the lion's share of our tourism dollars spent on maintenance and advertisement. Many communities would be proud to maintain any one of our locations that we take for granted. We're privileged to have several venues for tourists to enjoy. We have trails history, religious history, Civil War history, political history, and a renowned genealogical library. After the national attention was brought because of our lack of stewardship of our resources and the prospect of further destruction of our history, a group of us met in our living room and subsequently in the dining room of Brian and Sharon Snyder to explore what could be done to save what we still had. Several incidents happened during this period of several years. The number one tragedy that brought state and federal attention to our plight was the demolition of the Colonel Gates property, which was a valuable Truman property, and this was the home where President and Mrs. Truman spent Christmas Eve, and it was the home of Mrs. Truman's relative. Our group had protested this demolition, and the Missouri DNR was sending a representative to the city council meeting that same evening that the property was hurriedly demolished at about 4 o'clock, just prior to the meeting. An enraged public attended that meeting as well as the state DNR. After much discussion, the council voted to put a moratorium on demolition until a plan could be devised to oversee future demolition. The good news is this moratorium saved the CNA depot, which is close to our hearts and today is a viable tourist destination situated on what was Missouri DNR property and right next to the Trails Museum. The Truman neighborhood has been upgraded but continues to need the residents' dedication to the preservation of the Truman legacy. We are now in the middle of another problem demolition, the Pioneer Cabin located at the Old Spring near the square. The book titled The Centennial History of Independence, Missouri by W.L. Webb, copyright 1927, tells the story of one of the first settlers to build a home in what was to become Independence. Mr. Shepherd and his bride arrived at Fort Osage by steamboat in 1825. They had several wagons, teams, and a number of Negro slaves. They proceeded into the wilderness along the Osage Trace, which connected the Osage Indians with their kin, the Kaw Indians. Mr. Shepherd had heard about the rich blue country and that the Indian treaty had been extinguished. He knew that the land would soon be open to new settlement in a short time, and he wanted his ground to be in a secure location. His wagon train arrived one evening at the public spring located on the east side of Independence near the present-day municipal light plant. And remember, this is 1927, the Sermon Center. We are told that this was a favorite camping place for Indians and for travelers who ventured into the wilderness. He was practically in the center of what was known as the Garden of Missouri, and he decided to stay. The land just west of the spring was elevated and covered with heavy forest trees, which indicated rich soil. His slaves felled the trees and built a log house near the spring. Later, the newly appointed judges of the county court met to decide where to locate the new center of justice in the new county. After riding over the county, they sat on a fallen log just west of Mr. Shepherd's house and decided that this was the best place for the location of the courthouse. Mr. Shepherd then relocated 3 to 4 miles away. One of his slaves was an expert with a broadaxe and hewed the logs for the new courthouse. And Don brought his broadaxe as a prop for our presentation. And he is not an expert with a broadaxe. In my opinion, this recounting of one of our first citizens' home in what was to become Independence gives credence to leaving the Pioneer Cabin right where it is and refurbishing it. If I remember correctly, the study that was done while Corey was tourism director indicated that the cabin should be moved to the area just west of the Trail Center and the CNA Depot. It was to be placed by the spring there in kind of a diorama of pioneer life and independence. This spring was used by the settlers traveling west on the trail that went by the Bingham Wagner. As I see our dilemma, we have 3 choices. Leave the cabin where it is at the Sermon Center, close to where the first cabin was built by that spring. Move the cabin to the trails property and place it in the open area where the campfires are sometimes held. And the final option, which is unacceptable in my opinion, is to demolish the structure and destroy that part of Independence history. The one universal problem is always funding. Tax dollars need to be used to the best advantage, and there's often a difference of opinion about the best use of these dollars. Before we destroy what could be a viable tourist attraction, why don't we explore ways that we could possibly obtain volunteer help? Many of our attractions have been saved by the work of dedicated volunteers. Don has spoken to a group that might be available to rebuild the cabin where it needs to be rebuilt. They have not made a firm commitment at this time, and he will relate that conversation to you. Perhaps some of our home improvement stores would be willing to donate materials to help with the project. Citizens often have artifacts that they want to see preserved. We had items from the CNA just appear on our front porch because people want to see them displayed for everyone to enjoy. Another option to be explored, and I'm not sure that this is still available, would be a loan from the revolving DNR fund. When the Joplin house across from the Truman home collapsed several years ago, the Sliders, Sally Schwink, and Don and I signed a note with the DNR for the funds to rebuild the house. It was repaid when we sold the house. Since this cabin will not be sold, I'm not sure exactly how this could work, but it's worth exploring.
The 2 of you to speak.
One sentence. I asked the Mayor, City Council, and Heritage Commission to put this demolition on hold until some other avenues can be explored. And thank you for your consideration. And Don will share with you who he talked to if they go on.
Yeah, self-defense. Well, when we talked about a broadaxe, I thought I'd share with you what was used to hew the logs for the cabin. And this is my great-grandfather's broadaxe. They're all the same.
We're qualified. We've had the opportunity to make several of our historic areas saved through volunteer programs. And I've been associated with the Carpenters Union for 30 years, and they do, with their apprentice program, do take on projects. And I spoke to a business agent and asked him if they would be interested in looking at this project, and they are interested in getting more information. So I'm asking also that we put this on hold until we can get some ideas of where we're going to get the material, what the material is going to cost, what we need the Carpenters Apprentice Program to do, and whether they're willing to do it or not. And that's where it boils down to take a look at it and see whether it's a project that they would like to take on. It is going to take a while. So I would ask that we put a hold on this program until we get some more information and have a better idea of what we can do. Moving it over to the Frontier Trails Museum area is one that I don't have much of a problem with, because there is a spring that's just to the north of that property. And that is one of the areas that they got their water ready to go on the Western Trail. And I think it would fit the landscape that's there. It would just keep something for the people to see. You've got to have something for the people to look at when they come to look at your history. You don't want to have a sign, this was here at one time, and we lost it. We have the opportunity to make a change in location, but keeps the authentic idea of what happened. And it's not something that we haven't done with other projects. The CNA station was moved from Elm Street, or from Antone's, to where it is now. And people said it couldn't be moved. There are movers who could take that building and move it and put it exactly where we want it. But the idea of tearing it down is not one that I would like us to consider. It's savable, and it's necessary. If we're going to have the history of independence saved, we've got to do it a building at a time. And I think this is what we need to say.
First of all, I'd like to just echo everything my good friends Don and Joe Reinl did. And I might remind the politicians in the room, it took us several election cycles to make changes in this community, to make it a more preservation-friendly community. And Don was one of the leaders of that on the hands-on side and on the political side. And we were rebuilding houses that were collapsed. We moved. We had burnt-out apartment buildings were being built better than they had ever been before, and we were the attention of the state of Missouri for the things that we saved, the things that nobody else even thought was even possible. we were on the leading edge, and all eyes were on us. We were even several projects on HGTV programming when HGTV was just invented. And we were there at one of the very first programs of on Restore America program by Bob Vila. And so, you know, we didn't, these things didn't occur overnight, but also our loss of focus on all these things doesn't occur overnight. It occurs election cycle after election cycle, and these losses, all these may seem small losses, but they all add up. We're the Landmark program. I've got we were on the Heritage Commission, that started the process of trying to do more preservation planning. We tried to create the Landmark program. I think after my tenure, I was the chairman of the Heritage Commission. After my time there, I think it finally got on board, and we volunteered our house as the first one. But I was so proud of the City of Independence. They were going to volunteer all the city sites to be on the Landmark program, to set an example to the rest of the community on community stewardship, period. This was the attitude back then. That's gone. We don't have that anymore. I would remind everyone in the room that the Heritage Commission can make judgments on this thing, but the City Council can override anything they want. City Council overrides Planning Commission views. They don't necessarily listen to the PUAB. They have their own minds, and so don't think that the final words at the Heritage Commission, because I've been proud of the Heritage Commission lately. They're doing good work, and I think we have some good people on there. We have very qualified people, and I'm thrilled that they're in the room here. And I too think it should be left in place, just to play by the rules everybody else has to play, that our property has to abide by. I think the cabin is not, adds value to wherever we move it. I think it's probably more appropriate, or maybe even more economical, to keep it where it is. It adds value to the Potawatomi monument that the Boy Scouts did in collaboration with the Indian tribe, that make that. Okay, well, I think it. Well, let me just. I think there's some things we could do to make it. To make it weather better. We could put siding on it and just show the inside logs. I think it would make it. But anyway, I appreciate your time. I think I'd like to keep it there. To send it to another site that's also neglected makes no sense. I mean, they've had plans for that area, and nothing happens. There was a log cabin that was moved, that they disassembled and stored in the trail center. We talked to John Mark Lambertson. They went to a lot of trouble to store a log cabin there for future reuse. Nobody knows where it went. It disappeared. So, I mean, I think people want it moved just because they think it's an eyesore, and it's easier to neglect in another location. We just need to. This represents some of the oldest construction, and a structure that was more for the working class. We like to celebrate the big mansions, but there's parts of this history of this community that we don't tell. There's parts of the story of this community that we don't tell. And so this cabin just represents part of that of the working class, the people that founded this community. They probably worked on the trail. I know more research needs to be done, so we know more about the people and places and what's and the actual age. I've seen the age of the cabin go all over the place, but it's an important piece. This is the Heritage League of Kansas City. They highlight all the historic sites in the Kansas City area. It's just listed here as one of them. I'm sure it's listed on several websites for travelers. Just because we make it go away, you know, we have this history of brochures that we have on our own stand now, but also all across the country, and part of what the folks outside our city limits, you know, think is important. You know, we're a part of a heritage region, and we tend to think that that this is just local history, and it's not. It's not. It's much bigger than that. Yes. Well, maybe somebody else has more information about that. I think it was in the late 90s, 91, okay, early 90s. And I understand, and you know, so I think it's disrespectful, you know, to the not just to the people who did all the work, the Gamble family, and the people who donated, Dr. Holder, who donated it, but you know, this was a Native American memorial site for. It wasn't just to remember the Indians. There was 49 or something like that. Indians from the Potawatomi tribe, mostly children who perished because they were forced out of Indiana and came through independence. So and the independence folks were very generous to the Potawatomi when they were here. This was in 1838. They gave them shoes. Winter was coming. They gave them shoes to wear. So I think that says that the community was a very generous community in this time. So I think the Indian Memorial is important. Here again, this is about the diversity of this area, the Native American, the working class, the African American class. I mentioned Sam Shepard. We live next door to descendants of the Shepard family. You know, they go back 1825. So you know, there's it's extremely rich history that we have here that we want to protect. Give the mic to somebody.
Hi. Hello? I don't think it's working. Oh well. I have a loud voice. My name is Sharon Snyder, and I am very emotional. Brian and I have spent almost our entire married life. We grew up here. We raised our kids here. We own a historical home, and we are very passionate about trying to save things for the next generation. We no longer can say that the people that came before us, like Mr. Gamble was talking, these people rallied. This log cabin is a survivor. It survived the Civil War, it survived urban renewal, but it can't seem to survive the City of Independence, who have put no amount of funding into this. But my cause is that Mr. McCoy, and I've transcribed almost 600 or more of his letters, and in 1838 he writes about 7 to 8 different Native American tribes that he could distinguish right up here on the square. And the Potawatomi, right now the National Park Service is doing an incredible job in southern Missouri for the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Death was even worse, and it went through here in Independence. But the 3 points I want to make: the cabin needs to stay where it is. period. We already know that another log cabin, and many of us who are older might remember, I'm going to say that RLDS, now the Community of Christ, they used to do a pageant, and there's a log cabin there. What happened to that log cabin? But my point is that it survived. Our own daughter has lived here. She's lived in an old house. She presently lives out of state and lives in an older community. But she mentioned something to me that broke my heart. She goes, that's my history. I went and played basketball at the Sermon Center. I went up and down William Chrisman and Truman. Basketball. When I come home, I see that cabin. Anyone that's visited Santa Calagon has seen that cabin. It doesn't have to be open, but it is a landmark. It belongs to the City of Independence. And to make this site better, and what's more even disappointing to me, is that we're going to be, is like Brian, my husband, stated, we live in a, Mr. McCoy and Samuel Owens had tons and tons of money. But the people who saw when we became the state of Missouri, they saw a log cabin. They didn't see big brick buildings. They didn't see the Vale. They didn't see the Bingham. They saw these log cabins. And that was, what do you need to survive? Water, food, and shelter. This represents people who made it possible for other people to go to establish Oregon, California, and Santa Fe. We have one of the biggest festivals in Independence named after the Santa Fe, Oregon, California trails. And yet not one dime of that goes to help save that cabin that they would have seen. But back to my daughter, like I said, we have a generation who have younger people who have seen that cabin. Did they go visit it? It's not for us to make that choice. We have people that come to our city just to see our history. They come here to see us. I ask each one of you, do you go on vacation? Do you go see Target? Do you go see a farmer's market? Or do you go see something you can't see in your own city? Okay, done. Like I said, I had cried. My point is, it needs to stay where it is and be rehabbed. The whole area needs to be national. Oh, and one other thing. Give me 1 second. And in 3 more years, 2021, we will be celebrating the bicentennial of Missouri and the Santa Fe Trail. How embarrassing for this city if that leaves. And last year, if the council doesn't know it, Independence was once again placed on places of peril with the state of Missouri. So.
As usual, I have one question. Unfortunately, I was on the original board for Jim Austin. I was on the original board for Bingham Wagner, the original board for Chicago North and People. And I think it would be a tragedy. How many log cabins do we have in Independence? Once it's gone, it's gone. And some things that we need to be really careful about. When we went to raise money for Bingham Wagner, it was $500,000 that we were trying to raise, and we raised $280,000. Matched $250 was matched from the city, and they got a grant. I don't think you want to publish too much that it's going to cost $250,000 to restore it. You have to take small bites. It's very difficult heading for a goal of $250,000. For instance, when I was on the Bingham Wagner board, Don Reimel, who was then the city councilor, was the one who was responsible for recruiting people to help save the Chicago Alta Depot. If you remember, the Chicago Alta Depot wasn't even as good a shape as what this log cabin is when we got it. I think if you've been to it recently, you should be very, very proud. John Thornton, who's the president of CNA, certainly. And yes, when we travel, I put together excursions, twice a year, basically to view historic sites. We were taking 110 or 112 people twice a year. As we age, we're now down to one busload a year, and funds from that goes towards preservation of helping keep Chicago from people. One question I have about the Brady cabin. We had a gentleman by the name of Chris Brady that painted the Depot last time 2 years ago. And so I got interested in the name of Brady, and I didn't know if he was related to the Bradys or not, and as it happens, he was not. But I had written an article in the newsletter about the Bradys returning to Bradytown. Was this cabin originally in Bradytown Irish community? Does anyone know? Yes? In that case, then the cabin is older than Independence, because Bradytown was there before Independence was declared a site or declared a town. Basically, it went from Dr. Holder's office over to the other spring by Chicago and Alton, and the Trail Center. That was an Irish community called Bradytown Irish Community. And once it's gone, it's gone. I wish I had answers for you, but I would sure encourage everyone to get together and hustle. And, there's lots of civic-minded people. There's probably 200 people in Independence that belong to the Bingham Wagner Historical Society, the Vale Society, the National Frontier Trail Center, the you name it. And if there's something like this, all they need to do is be contacted, and you'll be surprised how many people can donate towards it. I'm sorry.
Do you have a preference?
No, I just want to. Doesn't make any difference.
I have a quick question. Why do you call it a Brady cabin? Why do you call it? Okay, why do you? I've heard it called Brady cabin, and I don't know where that came from. I'm just curious on if anybody knows where that came from.
Some of the stories that I've heard is that there was a Brady family that inhabited
That cabin? Yes.
The folklore that I know right now, and I have not done more research, but the idea is that the Irish were not well liked here in Independence. In fact, where this building is today was the African American community, which had a better status than the Irish. And during the Civil War, the Bradys kind of were left alone. And yes. And the folklore is the reason why they were left alone was they supposedly made the best whiskey. So that's kind of all that. I don't know if the problem is you can't say that during this period of time, especially early on, these men who were going on the trails played lots and cabins like cards. They had to raise a lot of money to go on their adventures on the trails out. And so, all we can say, I have not looked at the city minutes. I will be honest with you to look at that. I know Nancy Ehrlich is doing a lot of research right now for us for that.
Who else would like to speak?
Hi, my name is Lisa Manthe, or Lisa Manthe Peverill, depending on. I grew up in Independence and was away for about 30 years in college and living in Atlanta. And while I was gone, I used to refer to this place as the Forrest Gump of hometowns. Now I'm going to pull a Sharon and get emotional. Didn't expect that. Because you name a decade anytime after the early 1800s, and Independence has something that happened here that affected outside of here. We let that go at our peril. It's our golden ticket. It's the one and only thing that will restore economic vitality to the city. Anyway, enough of that, because those people said it better than I will. Back in the 70s, I was one of the school kids that carried around a little cardboard cabin to raise money to restore it. When the elders of the town went to move it, they taught all of us school kids about the history of the cabin, and we were instrumental in raising some of the money. We felt an ownership of that cabin, and I still do. So that's why I'm getting teary now talking about its crazy old cabin. We can do that again. We have our own school system. It seems that we could imbue our children with respect for their history and involve them in raising money to restore it and keep it vital. We know from bad history that if you own the children, you own their parents. Perhaps we could turn that on its head. Anyway, so many notes from so many different visits to the cabin and just conversations about it. Losing track of myself here. One thing I noticed on a visit to the cabin, aside from the fact that the marker went up in 1974, and I think that time feels about right with my history on when we were raising money for it. It was pre-bicentennial. It had termite service at one point by Augustine Termite Company, and perhaps somebody before that. Not really sure what happened to that contract.
It's every year.
Is it? Okay. Not doing too good of a job, huh? I mean, because it's got.
Well, I do want to say this. I read a news article that the termite damage existed at the time it was moved.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
we didn't soak the logs. We didn't.
I don't think any preservation was done to the logs.
Right. I don't think we didn't know what to do with it. But since then, we haven't done anything. So that, and the floodlights around it haven't been kept. So I mean, I'm just wondering. Shame on us as a city that we didn't maintain it. And so I think we would be well served to move back the clock a little bit and do what's right by the cabin. And as to why it was moved there, where the police station now sits is where the spring originally was. And around 1974, they were building the police station, and they couldn't do that over the spring and what was then the Potawatomi marker. So that was moved down to adjacent to the Sermon Center. And the cabin was moved there as the anchor for that spot. Okay? So the spring was relocated down the hill to make way for the police station to be built. And the cabin was moved there to anchor it. That answers that question you were asking earlier. At least that's that's my understanding. If someone's got a better answer, then please correct me.
We're at 4 minutes. Would you like to state what you're in favor of doing with the cabin?
I think that if it can be preserved in one form or another where it is located, for all of the reasons that it was put there to begin with, which I think were important, then that would be a good thing. And I think we need to think outside the box about that. I know that we're thinking of moving the tourism office location into the chamber. That's an option, perhaps, anyway, and I think we might want to think about perhaps building some sort of glass or other kind of see-through built structure around and over the cabin and relocate our tourism center onto that corner somehow. Something to preserve it and use it. Because the Sermon Center is a great location, and it brings in the community. There's good parking there. It's on a central thoroughfare, Truman Road and Nolan Road, where people access the city. So having our tourism center on that corner, utilizing that cabin and the spring, which is why Springs is why Independence became the Queen City of the trails and why the trails left from here. And if we don't preserve the spring, then Independence has no purpose in history as a bedrock beginning from whence everything else about its history sprung. Pardon the pun, or maybe embrace that. So there are options if we think outside the box between just tearing it down or moving it or whatever. I think bringing a lot of minds to the table as what this idea was, something good is going to come out of that, but we need to have actual discussion about that and maybe round table a little bit about that. Anyway, does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay.
Who else would like to speak?
I'm Gail Coffey. And I'm sitting here, I'm listening to everybody who wants to save the cabin. I'm in favor of saving it in spot. Just leave a little note for everybody. I thought we were a presidential town that was happy about our heritage and our history. Here's a thought for you. What would Harry S. Truman do if he knew that our history was being erased? And as a descendant of Harry S. Truman, I'm telling you now, I'm not happy about it.
My name is Andrew Smith, and I grew up here in Independence. I live in Kansas City now, but I can provide a tiny bit of history. I wish I remembered more, but when I was an infant, we lived in that log cabin. This was when it was further up the street by the small animal hospital. And my understanding is my parents rented it at the time, and they had a landlady named Mrs. Leach, and I'm not sure if that was the landlady that they rented the log cabin from. But the story is that after I was born at the Independence Sanitarium, they brought me home to the log cabin, and I don't think I lived there very long. Of course, I don't remember it at all, but apparently there was a lot of leaks in the roof. And there was a big rainstorm one night, and apparently there was a leak that was right above my baby crib. So we moved out. I think we moved out that same night. And so I wish I was older than an infant so I could provide more detail, but I don't remember being there. I remember it being up the street by the animal hospital because my parents would always point it out to me. I kind of remember it looking a little bit different than how it looks now on the outside, but I'm not sure. And I would very much like to see it stay where it is. I definitely don't want to see it demolished. And I also should say I agree with the point that it's part of working class family history, because we were certainly working class when we lived there. My father worked at Sheffield Steel at the time, so I'm all for having it preserved, and yeah, I'll do volunteer work to help out if that would help too.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
What year were you born?
Oh yes, I was going to mention that. That was 1965.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? No one else wants to speak this evening in favor of or otherwise?
I would like to say a couple of words. I'm afraid I might get hung in this room. My name is Mike Dwayne, and I've lived 2 blocks north of here for 40 years. I have worked at Fort Osage for 20 years, and I consider myself a preservationist. I asked a friend who works for the State Museum to come down and look at the cabin with me. Neither of us thought that it was really very consistent with log cabin construction. And my biggest concern is that if we preserve this thing, we really should have the story behind it. And I have heard everything from 1830 to 1868. Nobody really seems to know anything about the cabin. And without the story behind that cabin, it is just another old log structure. The fort has National Historic Landmark designation because it sits on the site of the fort. We have original foundations, and that is what gives us. Missouri Town, on the other hand, I hope most of you are familiar with Missouri Town. We have a cabin that was taken from somewhere in the vicinity of Cracker Neck Road and Lee Summit Road. We have what we call our tavern that started out as a trading post and was later kind of a way station that came from up by Berry Road. Those buildings really have no, from a technical standpoint, those buildings have no historical significance. They're not on the site they were on. I called to make sure this morning to see if there was any historical designation for Missouri Town. They can't get a historical designation. The buildings are no longer on the original site. And technically that is what gives you historical designation, that you were, this is the building that was on this site. I've given it a bunch of thought because, again, I consider myself a pretty hardcore preservationist, so I hang out with historians, and all historians are weird. I'm a biologist. But I wonder if we wouldn't be better to use the usable logs in the cabin and construct a cabin using historic materials and leave it where it's at or put it at the trail center or wherever. When my friend from the State Museum looked at it with me, we couldn't find an awful lot of termite damage. We did find a lot of wood rot, just for moisture. You know, I'm not going to shed any tears if we keep it up, and I'm not going to shed any tears if we take it down. But I would like to see the city who's spending my tax dollars be both historically conscious and physically responsible. So I think really before any decision is made, bear in mind that wood rot is continuing as we sit around researching, but that without the story behind that cabin, if we cannot determine an age, if we can't determine a location, if we can't determine a family, if we can't connect some story to that cabin is of absolutely no use to us, because the stories are what keep Independence alive, not structures. I'll say my little piece. If any of you people have ropes, please don't use them.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak this evening? No one else wishes to speak this
Can I
evening?
speak without having to go on your camera?
Well, it's a public meeting, so,
Well, George Clinton purchased that from Mr. Younger. Mr. Clinton, George Clinton, who gave Harry S. Truman his first job, sold it to the Leaches. The Leaches is who was the landlord when he lived there. There is significant history to that cabin. That cabin should stay where it sits.
okay.
Maybe use the tourism dollars and move the tourism center to the servant center or move it into the cabin, but it needs to stay right where it's at.
Can you state your name, please?
I go by Dave.
Can you provide deeds and documents with that?
I can provide you everything you need to have. Mr.
Specific
Perkins.
deeds and documents?
I've got everything. First time it was registered was in 1880. I think that's where a lot of the problems come into, but it's a lot older than 1880.
I'd love to see the deeds and documents.
Be more than happy to provide it to you.
Okay, is there anyone else who wishes to speak this evening? We do want to thank everyone for taking their time to come out. This is a really important discussion, and it's one that we want to have with the community. We are scheduling another meeting on August 11th, and that's Saturday. We'll be holding that in the City Theater at the Sermon Center. So if you would like to speak and did not speak this evening, you're more than welcome to come to that meeting. Otherwise, if you'd like to let other members of the public know that we will be meeting one more time to be able to pull together additional public comments, we would really appreciate that.
What time will that meeting be on the 11th?
That will be at 10 a.m. And again, that's Saturday, August 11th. And unless our commissioners or council member had anything additional, just one moment. Did you have any comments or anything additional to add?
I just wanted to thank the community for coming out and taking the time this evening to share your thoughts on this particular matter.
Yes, Ms. Martin.
Wendy, since you're taking notes of how people feel, perhaps the people who didn't feel comfortable coming up to talk could share with you their feelings, and you would be able to have a barometer of who all is here in the building tonight.
Yes.
The Mayor Weir has formed a subcommittee of council members to receive those direct comments as well. So in addition to the report that the Heritage Commission is putting together for the council, citizens are welcome to contact the council themselves directly. So you can go to City Council at indep.us or indepmo.org and email them, or you can call, and the council assistant is cataloging those and providing that information to the council as well. That number is 816-325-7022. So in addition to these public meetings, you can email and call the council to provide your concerns, suggestions for the future of the cabin as well.
Otherwise, yes.
What good is this meeting actually doing?
Well, we're collecting all the comments. The mayor has asked that a committee be established to actually reach out to the public and collect all the information regarding everyone's opinion about what they'd like to see with the cabin, about their concerns, about any history that they have with the cabin. I'll be collecting all of those comments, and that will be sent in a report that will be read and discussed at another council meeting.
I find it funny that they're going to have the first event at the farmer's market be a fundraiser for historic preservation, but yet we're talking about tearing down the cabin or moving the cabin and putting it in storage, but yet a certain group of people involved with the Chamber of Commerce want to utilize that farmer's market for a historic preservation fundraiser. I find that hypocritical and an absolute slap in our face.
Well, I'll tell you, at this point, no decision has been made. That's part of the process that we're going through right now. And so I appreciate everyone's comments, but I have to just reiterate that no decision's been made. We have several options on the table, and it is extremely important that you share your opinions either at these public meetings or via email or phone call with our council and with our Heritage Commission. And I do really appreciate you all coming out and taking your personal time to do that. Yes, ma'am.
You just said no decision has been made,
That's correct.
and I guess I'd just like a clarification, maybe City Council. The ordinance that was passed, didn't it require that the cabin be moved off the corner by a certain point?
First orders.
That's been delayed. We're
Well,
delaying that.
Is there an ordinance being passed that would officially, I mean, I'm just, from a purely parliamentary perspective, it's just hanging out there like Damocles' sword, just kind of dangling over. Anything could happen at any moment, like the town that was demolished on the eve of the city council. I mean, that's just out there.
History repeats itself.
So that just, when we say no decision has been made, yes.
That date was set, but there's been no funding. That date's been set, but there's been no funding allocated for that. So we're right now here at this standpoint, and we're getting input from the community.
That's.
Well, how would they make that decision to start with? That they could just do that?
They began a discussion, but again, there was no decision that was permanently made, and the mayor had asked that we reach out to the public and get public comment before any additional steps were taken. Ma'am, did you have a question?
I don't went out there, but they wouldn't, historical, something about it, about the youngers. I'm a younger. But Charles Younger owned that land. Then the cabin was built on it. He sold out. But they also said that his son, Henry, and Bathsheba, which is Judge Bristol's daughter, lived there. And they also, Dr. Holden told me told me that Cole could have been born there. He was born in 1744. So if someone wants to research all that.
Okay, well, thank you.
Just a question. At your last meeting that we attended, I thought you said, and maybe I misinterpreted, that if it were to go forward as an ordinance, that the council would vote and approve that, then it would come to this commission to say whether or not it could be demolished.
Well, I didn't discuss an ordinance, because I was not aware of an ordinance that had
No,
moved forward.
well, there's not one yet.
Yeah, it's individually listed as a local landmark. Any property that goes through alterations, and that would include demolition, would
Right.
come before the Heritage Commission.
Right, but, and not to dispute your authority, because obviously we're coming to appeal to you, but much like what happens with the PUAB, they could recommend that the cabins stand, and it could still be overturned by the council.
It absolutely can. That's the way that our system has been set up, that it can be appealed at the council level.
Thank you. Thank you for your service, by the way. We know it's not easy.
Oh, I'm very accurate on my articles.
So again, I thank everyone for taking the time to come this evening. I know it's your personal time. We greatly appreciate all of your comments. If you don't feel comfortable speaking publicly again, we'd be more than happy to take a phone call or an email. We can also answer any other questions that you might have about the Heritage Commission itself. But otherwise, I want to thank you. Please, if you are interested in that August 11th meeting, we'd love to have you come back. And otherwise, I thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.